Enjoy a narrated virtual tour of post-World War II aircraft exhibited in the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center. This tour features modern military aircraft flown after World War II. The museum is in Chantilly, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., is free to visit, but there is a $15 parking fee. The Bell X-1 marked the end of the first great period of the air age and the beginning of the second. In a few moments the subsonic period became history and the supersonic period was born. On October 14, 1947, flying the Bell XS-1 No. 1, Captain Charles Chuck Yeager became the first pilot to fly faster than sound. The airplane was drop-launched from the bomb bay of a B-29 and reached Mach 1.06, 700 miles per hour. Following burnout of the engine, the plane glided to a landing on the dry lake bed. The flight demonstrated that aircraft could fly faster than sound, and the concept of a sound barrier crumbled into myth. The Lockheed T-33 Shooting Star was the only jet trainer in the U.S. Air Force inventory from 1948 until 1957. The Air Force began phasing it out of frontline pilot training duties in the early 1960s. U.S. Air Force and Navy versions of the T-33 flew into the 1970s and 80s as utility aircraft and proficiency trainers. The museum's aircraft has never been painted and has a highly polished natural metal finish. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-15 shocked the West with its capabilities and made the acronym MiG synonymous with Soviet fighter plane. The MiG-15 featured the first production swept wing on a Russian aircraft, the first pressurized cockpit, and the first ejection seat. Late in 1950, MiG-15s piloted by Russians appeared over North Korea, and their prowess shocked and stunned Americans. Their deadly attacks, using one 37mm and two 23mm cannon, quickly ran all piston engine aircraft from the skies, including the B-29. Despite its high speed, excellent maneuverability, and high service ceiling, the MiG-15 was not very stable as a gun platform, with a tendency to Dutch roll at high speeds because of wing flexing and poor aileron effectiveness. In combat against the F-86, a much more advanced fighter but with very similar performance, the MiG-15 suffered a 10-to-1 loss ratio. A great deal of captured German aerodynamic data became available to North American aviation designers with the surrender of Germany in May 1945. Part of it showed that swept-winged aircraft could be controlled at a considerably higher Mach number, percentage of the speed of sound, than a straight-winged aircraft of the same general configuration. On September 15, 1948, a North American F-86 Sabre set a world speed record of 671 miles per hour. In addition to its high performance, it had excellent handling characteristics and was well liked by its pilots. In December 1950, the 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing, one of the first of the Air Force's Sabre units, arrived in Seoul to fight the Russian-built swept-wing MiG-15s, which had appeared in Korea in November. By the end of the Korean War, the Sabres destroyed almost 800 MiG-15s with the loss of fewer than 80 F-86s. The National Air and Space Museum's F-86 Sabre was assigned to the 4th Fighter Interceptor Group, and most of its combat missions were flown from Kimpo Air Base near Seoul. The Cessna 01A Bird Dog, military designation L-19A, was the winner of a 1950 contract for an all-metal, short unimproved field aircraft capable of performing a variety of tasks. As specified, the Bird Dog had the capacity to trade wheels for skis or floats and had a bomb rack under each wing. A steel spring landing gear reduced ground loop tendencies and made unimproved field operations practicable. A slotted high-lift flap along the trailing edge of each wing increased performance during slow flight and short field landings. In the Korean War, the L-19 was used for a variety of missions including artillery spotting, laying communication wire, evacuating wounded, and dropping supplies and flares. During the Vietnam War, the Air Force employed the Bird Dog and its crew as a forward air controller for supersonic jet fighters. This Bird Dog was transferred to the National Air and Space Museum on May 2, 1978. The North American F-100D was the most widely produced version of the Super Sabre, over 1,200 were built. It was intended only to fulfill the fighter-bomber role, not for air superiority missions. It was equipped with a Minneapolis Honeywell MB-3 automatic pilot. This device allowed the pilot to work with both hands on maps reading or weapons arming while the Super Sabre flew itself to the target. Following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, F-100Ds began flying missions over North Vietnam. These missions were generally of two types: MiG combat air patrols armed with Sidewinder missiles to protect strike aircraft from attack by marauding North Vietnamese fighters, or fighter-bomber strikes carried out with conventional iron bombs against ground targets. Throughout the late 1960s and early 70s, they were gradually withdrawn from combat in Vietnam and replaced by more capable types such as the F-105 and the F-4. The Chance-Vought RF-8 is the photo reconnaissance version of Vought's famous F-8 Crusader, which was the first carrier-based aircraft to exceed 1,000 miles per hour. They flew their first combat missions triggering cameras instead of weapons as part of the photo reconnaissance flights over Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. It had a variable incidence wing in which the wing was capable of being rotated about its rear spar to raise the entire wing, thereby increasing visibility for the pilot. In addition, the entire leading edge and the ailerons could be lowered to increase the effective camber of the wing and consequently reduce approach and landing speed. The outer wing tips were made foldable for carrier storage. This Crusader was the Navy's last operational F-8. Republic Aircraft's F-105 Thunderchief was a supersonic, single-seat, fighter-bomber capable of carrying nuclear weapons and heavy bomb loads over great distances at high speeds. The F-105D variant was an all-weather fighter-bomber version, fitted with radar for night or bad weather operations. During the Vietnam War, F-105 units operated from bases in Thailand. On a typical mission over North Vietnam, the Thunderchief carried 6 750-pound or 5 1,000-pound bombs, along with 2 450-gallon drop tanks. It was also capable of carrying 2.75-inch rocket pods, napalm canisters, as well as 4 Sidewinder infrared homing air-to-air missiles. The Thud was not as maneuverable as nimbler MiGs. Because the aircraft's ordnance was carried externally, maximum performance could only be reached once the bombs and rockets had been jettisoned or after the aircraft was clear of the target. Thunderchiefs in Vietnam flew more than 20,000 combat missions. 350 Thunderchiefs were lost in combat, most of them to North Vietnamese anti-aircraft fire. The MiG-21 was Russia's first truly modern second-generation jet fighter. It has a unique tailed delta configuration with a very thin delta wing. This wing gave it maneuverability, high speed, good medium altitude performance and adequate takeoff and landing characteristics. It soon became the standard clear air interceptor for the Soviet Air Forces. By adding radar in the MiG-21PF and more powerful engines and blow-up flaps in the MiG-21S, the aircraft became a multi-role fighter. It saw combat around the globe almost from the moment it was exported. It has served with Arab states against Israel in the Six-Day War during June 1967 and in the October 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israel claimed 245 air-to-air kills against MiG-21s in a 16-year period beginning July 1966, but Israeli losses to MiG-21s are unknown. In India, it flew against Pakistan in December 1971. This combat included the first encounter between the MiG-21 and the Lockheed F-104A. It was met over North Vietnam by American forces, which established a kill advantage of 5.5 to 1. The U.S. Air Force donated this MiG-21 F-13 to the National Air and Space Museum in August 1990. McDonnell's F-4H-1 Phantom II was the Navy's first Mach 2 carrier-based aircraft capable of carrying missiles, Sparrows. Its primary mission was as an all-weather fleet air defense aircraft, although it retained its original initial attack capability. The Phantom II was qualified for both land and sea operations, and within a few years several versions were produced for the U.S. Air Force. By the time of the Tonkin Gulf incident, 13 of 31 deployable Navy squadrons were armed with Phantom IIs. During the war, U.S. Navy F-4 Phantom squadrons participated in 84 combat tours with F-4Bs, F-4Js, and F-4Ns. The Navy claimed 40 air-to-air victories at a cost of 73 Phantoms lost in combat, with an additional 54 Phantoms lost in mishaps. The last Navy F-4 made its final carrier landing aboard the USS America in October 1986. The first Grumman A-6A was delivered to the Navy in 1963 and to the Marines in 1964. The first operational squadron to receive them was VA-75, which began supporting U.S. forces in Vietnam in 1965, flying from the carrier USS Independence. The navigation equipment in its subsystems enabled the crew to attack pre-selected targets at night or under adverse weather conditions without having to look out of the cockpit during the mission. 19 A-6A models were modified to A-6Bs for suppression of enemy anti-aircraft missiles, known as Iron Hand missions. The final version of the Intruder, the A-6E, first flew in February 1970, featuring an updated avionics suite, airborne radar set, and navigational computer. Since Vietnam, A-6s have made effective all-weather strikes against targets in Libya during the Gulf of Sidra crisis, Iranian gunboats in the Persian Gulf, and Iraqi installations during Desert Storm operations. The Intruder's last combat missions were over Bosnia in 1994. Intruders were retired in 1997. Lockheed's SR-71 Blackbird is the fastest aircraft propelled by air-breathing engines. The Air Force decided that flying the SR-71 safely required 2 crew members, a pilot and a reconnaissance systems officer, RSO. The RSO operated the monitoring and defensive systems, including an electronic countermeasures system that could jam most acquisition and targeting radar. The Blackbird actually achieved its best gas mileage, in terms of aeronautical miles per pound of fuel burned, during the Mach 3 Plus cruise. When the SR-71 became operational, orbiting reconnaissance satellites already replaced manned aircraft for gathering intelligence from sites deep within Soviet territory. Satellites could not cover every geopolitical hotspot, so the Blackbird remained a vital tool for global intelligence gathering. On March 6, 1990, the service career of one Lockheed SR-71A Blackbird ended with a record-setting flight. It was flown from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. in 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 20 seconds. It landed at Dulles International Airport and taxied into the custody of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Grumman's F-14 Tomcat primarily conducted air-to-air and reconnaissance missions with the U.S. Navy until the 1990s, when it was also employed as a long-range strike fighter. It saw considerable action in the Mediterranean Sea and Persian Gulf and was used as a strike platform in the Balkans, Afghanistan and Iraq until its final U.S. deployment in 2006. Primary missions include precision strike against ground targets, air superiority, and fleet air defense. It could deploy an assortment of air-to-ground ordnance in various configurations, while simultaneously carrying air-to-air missiles. Its targeting system allows delivery of various laser-guided bombs for precision strikes in air-to-ground combat missions. The actual last flight of an F-14 in U.S. service took place on October 4, 2006, when an F-14D was ferried from NAS Oceana to Republic Airport on Long Island, New York. The McDonnell Douglas F/A-18 Hornet replaced the F-14 Tomcat and A-7 Corsair II in Navy service, and the Marine Corps F-4 Phantom IIs. It performs fighter escort, fleet air defense, suppression of enemy air defenses, air interdiction, close air support, and aerial reconnaissance missions. The Hornet first saw combat action during the 1986 United States bombing of Libya and subsequently participated in the 1991 Gulf War and 2003 Iraq War. The U.S. Navy's Blue Angels Flight Squadron switched to the F/A-18 Hornet in 1986. The last operational deployment of the F/A-18C Hornet in U.S. Navy service was aboard the USS Carl Vinson and ended on March 12, 2018. The Lockheed Martin X-35B is the technology demonstrator for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, a stealthy, supersonic, multi-role fighter. After meeting the goals for the conventional takeoff version, the X-35A was modified into the X-35B for testing the short takeoff vertical landing features. There are 3 operational F-35 Lightning II variants. The F-35A is the conventional takeoff and landing variant intended for the U.S. Air Force and other air forces. It is the smallest, lightest version and capable of 9 Gs, the highest of all variants. The F-35B is the short takeoff and vertical landing variant of the aircraft used by the Marine Corps. Similar in size to the A variant, the B sacrifices about a third of the A variant's fuel volume to accommodate the shaft-driven lift fan. The F-35C is a carrier-based variant designed for catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery operations from aircraft carriers. Compared to the F-35A, the F-35C features larger wings with foldable wingtip sections, larger control surfaces for improved low-speed control, stronger landing gear for the stresses of carrier-arrested landings, a twin-wheel nose gear, and a stronger tailhook for use with carrier arrestor cables. I hope you enjoyed this narrated virtual tour of post-World War II aircraft displayed in the National Air and Space Museum. If you would like to tour other aircraft in this series, you will find convenient links in the description section below this video. Here are YouTube suggested links on a similar topic that you may enjoy viewing.